On this question, what we're looking at is we're going to be trying to find out what L is. So we're looking at a rectangle, and we're looking at the area of a rectangle. Now, what do we know about the area of a rectangle? Well, the area of a rectangle is the length times the width, right? Now, what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and take this total area that we have here. We're going to try to factor it, and then we're going to see what part this L matches up with. Because we want it to be two sets of parentheses. One's the length and one's the width. And one of them's already given here. So what we do is we factor that total area. So let's begin by factoring 16 z cubed x squared minus 32z squared x. So let's see what we can do here. Okay, so we're just looking at 5-4. We're going to finish it up. We're looking at these couple of questions that involve the rectangles. So area of a rectangle is the length times the width. Now, this is your length. We're going to try to find it. And this is your width over here. You can label them either way. But we know one of them, we need to find the other one. And we find it by factoring. Okay, so we take this total area and we factor. What can I factor out of here to begin with? Can someone tell me? Okay, 16 for the number. And variable-wise, what can I factor out? Okay, we could take, it looks like an x out, and what else? We can also take out a z squared. And if I factor that out, then what's that going to leave you with? That is going to leave you with, okay, 16s are gone, x squared, x is left over, z cubed, that leaves you with a z. And then we've got a minus, and 32 divided by 16, that's a 2. Z squared is gone. X is gone. Now, when we look at our area is the length times the width. This right here matches up with that piece, right? So that means that this piece right here has to be the L. So what would your L, the missing part, be? Your L would then be 16xz squared. And that's going to be the missing part. That is your L. That is what you're trying to find. We'll do another one here. That's your L. Let's do another one. It's all you have to basically do is factor it. It just looks a little bit different. And remember the fact that this is a rectangle. And when we look at a rectangle, the area of a rectangle is length times width. And all you have is rectangles. You don't have any other figures. So let's try another one here. And I'll give you a total area. So that's going to be our new total area. And I'll give you one piece, and you've got to find the other one. And I'll call this one x plus 7 and w. And I want you to find, in this case, the w. Okay, the missing part, which is the w. Now we know that the area is a length times the width. So we want to get it into two separate parentheses so we can see what this one is. And I try to pick things, and your homework is the same way. They're going to be very, very simple to factor. They're not hard to factor at all. This one is simple to factor. So we've got x squared minus 49. How would you factor this? Can someone tell me what this would factor into? Okay, yep. X plus, well, 49 is a perfect square, 7, right? So x plus 7, x what? Minus 7, right? Because 49 is a perfect square. Now, how did I know where to begin? How many terms did I have? 2. When you have 2 terms, it's either squares or cubes. 49 is not a cube, 49 is a square. Now the only type of square that we have is a negative, right, a difference. This is a difference of squares, so we factored it. Now we go back and we look, which piece are we missing? We're trying to find the W. We're trying to find this piece right here. This piece matches up with that piece, right? So then what's my W have to be? Yep. W then has to be, by elimination, x minus 7. Are we okay with how to work these out? Because you've got 7 and you've got 10 that are factoring those out to try and find the missing part. I think that should now pretty much finish 5.4. Well, let's look at 17. I'll go over 17 with you. Bless you. So let's think about a square. Now, what do we know about a square? What's different between a square versus a rectangle? Okay, yep. The length and the width are the same, right? So this has to be a perfect square trinomial. So we want to find the length and the width because they're going to be the same on this one. So again, we want to work with a square. So this is a square. And we need to again factor. All of these are just factoring. So we know it's a square. And the area is 25x squared plus 80xy, right? Plus 64y squared. Well, what do we know that this will factor into? Someone tell me what will happen here. We know it's a square, right? And is 25 a perfect square? Yep. 64 a perfect square? Yep. What's the sign in the middle? Positive. Okay. 25 is a perfect square of 5, so that's 5x. 64 is a perfect square of what? 8. So that's 8y there. So what's the sides? The sides are both, because it's a square, the sides are both 5x plus 8y. Right? Because it's quantity squared, and that's what it should be because it comes from a square. Square has the same sides, so that factored into a perfect square trinomial, and both sides are the same, and they are both going to be that 5x plus 8y. So that's what I'm wanting you to see on question 17. All the rest of the questions are just factoring. Now we're going to move on, and we're going to begin in 5.5. We're going to finish up 5.5 next week, but we will go ahead and start a little bit of it this week. And 5.5 is what you're going to be doing in college algebra. So this is the beginning of college algebra. And in 5.5, we're going to learn how to use the zero factor property. So we're going to solve with zero factor. And what we do with zero factor is step 1, we set it to 0. Because these are going to have equal signs, because these are going to be equations. And so we're going to set to 0. Step 2 is you factor, right? Zero factor. So we set it to 0, then we factor. And then step 3 is we solve each part. That's zero factor. And zero factor is very, very common in college algebra. So when you work these out in college algebra, you're going to have to use zero factor quite a bit. And I'll just pick some of these out from the textbook. It's everything we've done before. We're just using zero factor, meaning we have an extra step. So set it 0, factor, solve. Some of these are very simple. And they're all going to be solved with zero factors. So I'm going to make an easy one up before we start looking at questions from the textbook. So I'm going to give you this one to work through and solve. Now, when we look at this one, we cannot ever divide by the variable x. So you cannot divide by that x. What you have to do, since this is a polynomial, and we've got that x squared in it, we have to set it to 0. This is nonlinear. Okay, so it's nonlinear, so we're going to have to set this to 0. So the first thing we do, step number 1 is set to 0. So move that 4x over. Now I tried to make this one very, very easy to solve and work through. We're going to be using zero factor. So it's been set to 0. Now, what can I factor out of the left-hand side? Can someone tell me? An x can come out. So that leaves you then with a 3x minus 4. These are going to have multiple solutions. And the highest power tells you how many solutions you might have at most. You may have fewer, but you're going to have at least, in this case, at least 2. So you're going to have at most 2. So you can have at most 2 solutions. So we set this to 0. Now, we look at each piece individually. And so we look at what's inside the parentheses and what's outside the parentheses separately. And we set each part to 0. So what's out in front of the parentheses? X. So my first solution is x equals 0. Because that came from the x that was out in front. The other solution, we're going to have to use some algebra to find it. The other one comes from 3x minus 4 equals 0. We can solve that, right? This is now linear. We can solve it. So add your 4 over. So 3x equals 4. Divide by your 4. Divide by your 3. My mistake there. Divide by your 3. And that gives you now x is going to be 4/3. So there's your second answer. These have several answers in most cases. So this one has 2. 0. And it also has that positive 4/3. Let's do another one. Okay, I want you to solve this one. Now, we know we're going to have to set it to 0 and factor it because it's squared. Anytime you have a power or a square, you're going to have to set it to 0. That's what you always do if it's nonlinear. Whenever it has a square or a power or anything like that, it's nonlinear. So that means you solve it by setting it to 0. So we're going to move that 4 over. And now we've got 25x squared minus 4 equals 0. Can someone tell me what this is? How many terms do we have? 2, right? Okay. It always has to be 0. So we look here. How many terms do we have on the left-hand side? We have 2. Now, what do you notice about these? They are what? They are both squares. Okay? So what is this now? Difference of squares. Okay, so a difference of squares would factor out into a plus and a minus. 25 is a perfect square of 5, so that's 5x. And 5x. 4 is a perfect square of 2 and 2. Now this is going to allow us to get our two solutions. So it's been set to 0, and it's been factored. Now we set each part to 0. So each set of parentheses goes to 0. So 5x plus 2 equals 0. This is going to be our first one. Move this 2 over. So 5x and equals a negative 2. Divide by 5. And you will now have x equals a negative 2 fifths. There's one solution. And this is just one technique for solving these. In college algebra, you'll learn several others. We're going to learn the zero factor in this course, but in college algebra, you learn the square root property, you learn zero factor again, and you also learn the quadratic formula. But that'll be covered in college algebra. How do we get the other one? Well, the other one, we set the second set to 0. So 5x minus 2 equals 0. We add our 2, and that gives us then 5x equals 2. Divide by our 5, and that gives me then x equals 2 fifths. So there's my two solutions. Negative 2 fifths, and also positive 2 fifths. Let's try another one. Okay, so we're going to work with this one. Now, again, I'm trying to make these all pretty simple to do. And this one's going to be, again, solve. These all have the same directions. Anytime they have an equal sign, you want to set it to 0, factor it, solve it. That's our goal. Set to 0, factor, solve. Okay, so in this case, what are we going to do? Set it to 0. So I'm going to move that 6x over. And that leaves you with an x cubed. Plus 5x squared minus 6x, and that equals now 0. Earlier, I told you that the highest power is going to tell you how many answers you're going to have at most. So this one has 3, so we can have at most 3 answers. And this one's going to give us 3 different answers. About the most you're ever going to have is 3. What can I factor out to begin with? What can come out at the very beginning? Okay, an x can come out. So there's 1 right there. Now we've got x squared plus 5x minus 6. That's going to factor out because first times the last is a negative 6. And so we know, what about the signs? Are they different or are they the same? Negatives in the box, are they different or the same signs? Different, okay? Which one's larger, the positive one or the negative one? Yep, positive, because why? Middle's positive here. So, what two numbers multiply together to give you that negative 6, subtract from each other to give you 5? Can someone tell me? I try to make it pretty easy. Multiply together to give you 6, subtract to give you 5. What would you use? Yep, they have to be different signs though, right? They have to subtract from each other. Now, look at the 6 and look at the 5. What's the difference between them? 1. So how about we use a 6, positive, and a negative 1. Is that going to work? Yep. Now, if this would have been a positive 6 here, if that would have came out to be a positive 6, then you'd use 3 and 2. right? Because that would still give you the 5 in the middle. But this is negative, which tells me then 1 is positive, 1 is negative. Larger one's in the middle is positive. So we have to use 6 and 1. Now we can split it up into x squared plus 6x minus x minus 6. Factor out an x, and that leaves you with an x plus 6. Factor out a minus 1, and that leaves you with an x plus 6. Okay, and then those can go together. I'll write it over here. So these can go together. Out in front of it all, we have an x, right? That's the very, very beginning. That's going to come down. So that comes down right to here. There's that piece. Then we have an x plus 6. And then we also have an x minus 1, don't we? All of that at the very end still equals 0. We can now get our 3 answers, our 3 solutions. This one has 3, and let's find them. So let's try to find our solutions here. One of them is going to be x equals 0. Why is that going to be x equals 0? That came from that piece, right? So that x out in front factored, that gave you that x equals 0. Because we said each part, each component equal to 0. What about the next one? X plus 6 equals 0. Move the 6 over. So x equals a negative 6. There's the second solution. And what's your last solution? X minus 1 equals 0. Add your 1. And so your last solution is now x equals a 1. So this one has 3 separate solutions. Let's try another one. Let's try one that's already been factored for you. And in some cases, you might be given something that's already been factored. Now, what tells me that it's been factored? Remember, factored means you've got these parentheses. It's already been broken up into several separate sets of parentheses, which it has been. But this has been factored. So we want to solve it with 0 factored. Now, the first 2 steps have been done. It's already set to 0, and it has already been factored. I can multiply that 5x through in FOIL, but I'd be left with something I'd have to work with again. So this has already been set to 0, and it has already been factored. Now, we are going to get 3 solutions because this has 3 separate parts to it. So let's begin with what we've got out in front. And what's out in front? Well, out in front we've got a 5x. So we set it to 0. 5x equals 0. This is simple, but a lot of times students make a mistake here. The answer is not 5. We've got 5x equals 0. How do we solve it? We divide by 5. Okay, and when we divide by 5, 0 divided by 5 leaves you with a 0. So there's one solution. X equals 0. And we use 0 a lot because 0 absorbs other numbers. Because 0 divided by any number is still 0. So 0 can absorb other numbers. What about the next piece? 3x minus 1 equals 0. Add your 1. And now we've got 3x equals 1. Divide by our 3. And so we now have x equals 1/3. And the last one, 4x plus 3 equals 0. Move that 3 over. So 4x equals a negative 3. Divide by our 4. And now we've got x equals a minus 3/4. I want to do a couple more of these. And then we'll talk about our homework. And next class period, what we're going to be doing, next class period, is finishing up 5-5 and reviewing for our final exam. The final exam will cover a little bit of everything, but I'm going to give you a review. I'll give you one that I've worked out for you. You'll get a take-home one that'll be your homework, where you use that to prepare for your final, and then you'll have an in-class one. So next week, very important that you're here. So next week, that's going to be what we're going to be doing, is finishing up 5-5 and preparing for the final. And you're going to have a take-home final, but that's just basically your practice final. You'll just be take your practice final, do a different one to get ready for the real one. That way, when you come to your final exam in a couple of weeks, you'll be prepared. You're going to know exactly what type of questions I'm going to ask, and you'll do very, very well on it. Normally, students do very well in the final exam because you spend a lot of time working on it and practicing it. I'm going to try to pick 2 questions from our textbook to look at. Let me try to find 2 of them here. How about we look at, let's see if we can try to figure out how to factor, how about question 47? See if we can figure out what to do for 47. And this is on page 375. X squared minus 2x minus 5, and that equals 0. Okay, so first thing we know is we can see that this has already been set to 0. So the first step is done. Then we look at this with all the terms, and is there a number that can come out? Or a variable? No. So nothing comes out. How many terms do we have? 4. Okay, so we're going to have to try to factor this by grouping somehow. Notice this has a 2, this has a 2. This one's got a 5. So let's try to factor by grouping, and let's group the first 2 pieces together. Because I think this and that will match up, and that will match up. So let's try to factor this by grouping. And first 2 pieces, we're going to take an x squared out. And that leaves you then with a 2x plus 5. And the next 2 pieces, well, it begins with a negative. Whenever it begins with a negative, we've got to factor out a negative 1. And that leaves you with a 2x plus 5. Are my groupings the same now? Yep, they are. Okay. So that is now a 2x plus 5 and an x squared minus 1. I am not done yet. Can anyone see what I can do? What can go further now? Okay, x squared minus 1. Why? Because that is a difference of what? Squares, right? Because 1's a perfect square. You've got to break everything down as far as you possibly can. So we've got 2x plus 5. That's done. X squared minus 1. That's going to break up into plus and minus. It's a difference of squares. X and x, 1 and 1. So that's what it should look like when it has been completely factored. So this is completely factored. Now let's go ahead and get my solutions. And I'm going to have 3 of them. There's 1, 2, 3. So the first one, 2x plus 5 equals 0. Move the 5 over. 2x equals a negative 5. We'll divide by 2. So x equals minus 5 halves. That's 1. We're going to get 3 of them because we've got 3 sets of parentheses. Okay, what's another one? Well, the next one. X plus 1 equals 0. Move that 1 over. So x equals a negative 1. There's my second one. And then we need my last one. Which is x, excuse me, x minus 1 equals 0. Okay, let's try to focus. We're almost finished here. We'll do one more quick question after this one. So x minus 1 equals 0. We'll add the 1. And so my third and final solution is x equals 1. So you've got 1, negative 1, and negative 5 halves. I want to look at one more quick question. And this one we're only going to have one solution. And let's put a minus in the middle here and make that a minus there as well. That way it'll factor out nicely. And we'll use a minus 20x there. Okay, so I want you to solve this one. This one's only going to have one solution, because it's going to be squared. So what we're going to do is we're going to solve it just like the others. First things first, add the 4. Nothing new. And that is now 25x squared minus 20x plus 4. Can anyone see what this is going to factor into? Does anyone see something special about this one? Okay, yep. It's a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so what do we know about the middle? What's the sign going to be? Negative. Okay, and what goes here? This one's going to be a, 5x, isn't it? And what goes here? 4. Now, why do we only have one solution? We only have one solution because this is squared. So it's the same thing written twice, because this is (5x minus 4, right? 5x minus 4. It's written twice. So it's the same. It's written twice, so we only have one answer. Whenever you have something squared like this, you're only going to get one answer because it's the same thing, just written twice. So what's my one answer going to be? Well, it's going to be 5x minus 4 equals 0. Add your 4. So 5x equals 4. We'll divide by our 5. And now we've got x equals 4 fifths. And that's it. We only have one solution because it's squared. So let's go through our homework and see what we can work through. So for your homework for next class period, you should be able to do 5.4. You should be able to do them all. So you should be able to completely finish up 5.4 and 5.3 also. So you should be able to do all of 5.3, all of 5.4, and 5.5. We haven't done that many of them, but you can do a few of them here. Let's see which ones we can work through. You can do question 1 question 6, 7, 8. You can try 8. You may get confused on that one, though, but you could try 8. 9, you should be able to factor out and work through. 10, 11. Haven't done that one yet. Can't do 14 yet. Let's see here. 15. Yep, you can do 15. 16, you can do that one. And 19. So those are the ones that you can do for your homework. I will see everyone next week. And also remember, if you want to enroll for college algebra in the summer, it'll be June through July. It'll be 2 days a week. It'll be Monday, Wednesday, 8:30 to 11:30. So if you want to enroll in college algebra for the summer, I'll be teaching it, and it'll be Monday, Wednesday from 8:30 to 11:30, and it's June and July.